Before we cast on, we need to remove all of the needles that are lined up with the rubber dial slots. So we'll have one cylinder needle, one empty slot, one cylinder, one empty slot, all the way around. Then we're going to cast on with waste yarn. So this time, instead of putting your split rings every other needle, you'll have one on every needle. And now you're going to crank several rows until you have enough waste yarn that the split rings are well below where the ribber stop and the ribber fin connect. This seems like a good number of rows, so now I'm going to crank until the main mark is at the break in the yarn feeder. At this point, if you wanted, you could crank one row of very thin lace weight or tatting weight thread, and that just helps make that cast on edge a little bit tighter for that Juana's cast on, so that first cuff isn't quite as lacy. I'm not going to do that here just to save us a step on our demo, but you could put one row here in between the waste yarn and your project yarn. So I'm going to switch here over to my project yarn. And we are going to be using the heel spring, so thread your yarn under the clip. First, pull that waste yarn through. And if your needle immediately after the main mark is one that is missing, then I would use the one right before the main mark as your main mark needle for right now. And then I'm going to clip both ends of the yarn together in a weighted clip. So I have the waste yarn and the new project yarn hugging that needle that's going to be my main mark for now. I'm going to engage my heel spring. Now we are turning on the row counter, resetting it to 0. And we're going to crank just a few stitches to make sure that our project yarn is catching. And it is, which is good. And then I would go ahead and attach your ribber now. So you can try to, my ribber stop is right here, so that's where I'm lining up my fin. Again, you want to go straight down as much as possible, but it's possible to get jammed in those, this is kind of loose, so it can get stuck on the way down. So you kind of have to press it into place. And then use your bolts to attach the frame to the camshell. And from here, you're going to crank until the main mark is at 4 o'clock. Right about here. So now you want to, again, push your ribber stopper, your ribber dial back just the tiniest bit to make sure it's well seated. So now I'm going to start adding ribber needles. So just lay the needle in, make sure the latch is open, and then you lift up slightly on the ribber and reach in with the loom tool to get your project yarn and just lay it on top of the needle. Crank forward only a tiny bit so that you can do the next one. If you go too far and these start falling under here, you won't be able to add a ribber needle. So you're going to continue like that, adding the ribber needles all the way around. When your first ribber needles get to the area where they're ready to knit, I like to just take a quick peek at them and make sure everything is continuing to work as it should. One tip as I'm first casting on is I keep kind of just jiggling my ribber dial a little to make sure that my ribber needles are lined up exactly between the other two needles and over the empty slots. I find that if I am very careful about that and don't let them kind of swing one way or the other when I'm first starting, they're more likely to stay centered throughout my project. I've been watching as I went along. I can see they're all knitting well. Very important to check each stitch as it comes back around on this next row. to make sure that they have all knit well. None of the stitches have dropped. After the row counter turns to 3 and you see the main mark again, crank it till it's all the way at the break in the yarn feeder. You can choose to disengage your heel spring, or you can keep it on for the whole rest of the cuff if you would prefer. I am going to go ahead and take it off now that I finished my first few rows. Crank as many rounds of 1x1 rib as you want for the cuff. For our adult size, we did 24, and that included the cast on rows. Remember, do not crank too quickly. We crank at like this speed, very slowly, and watch every stitch to make sure that it doesn't drop. If you have a stitch drop on the first cuff, it's better just to take the whole project off the machine than try to fix it. Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.